The voice, sharp and serrated, sliced through the joyful cacophony of the Willow Creek annual block party with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't merely its volume that commanded attention. It was the chilling undertone of absolute, unquestionable authority. A demand for immediate deference that made Maya Evans's head snap up, her senses instantly on high alert. The rich, hazy aroma of charcoal-grilled hamburgers and sweet, buttery popcorn. The cheerful, slightly off-key strains of the local dad band covering a Stevie Wonder classic. The effervescent, carefree laughter of children engaged in a water balloon war. All of it seemed to momentarily recede, creating a pocket of tense silence around that one imperious sound. Maya's eyes, shaded by sunglasses, scanned the vibrant, sun-drenched crowd, a familiar knot of apprehension tightening low in her stomach. She was here to relax, to give her two young nephews, 8-year-old Jamal and 10-year-old Tariq, a perfect, sun-soaked memory of summer. Now, that fragile piece felt terribly, irrevocably threatened. Then she saw them, her boys. They were standing frozen like a pair of startled fawns near the makeshift lemonade stand. Their bright, laughing faces from moments before, now replaced by masks of confusion and dawning fear. Looming over them, her body held in a posture of rigid, righteous indignation. Was Karen Hawthorne, as the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's perceived tranquility and the president of its notoriously overzealous homeowners association, Karen's presence was a familiar, if unwelcome, fixture in the neighborhood? But today, something was different, even from 50 yards away. Maya could feel the palpable tension radiating from the scene, a dark, oppressive cloud abruptly eclipsing the afternoon's carefree spirit. Karen's face, usually a carefully composed mask of polite condescension, was contorted with an ugly, undisguised fury, her finger jabbing accusingly at Jamal, the younger and more sensitive of the two boys. Maya started walking, her casual stroll transforming into a purposeful stride, a cold premonition settling in her chest like a stone. She had encountered Karen's unique brand of self-righteousness before, usually in the form of passive-aggressive newsletter entries or nitpicking violation notices left on neighbors' doors. It rarely ended well, especially when it involved anyone who didn't fit her narrow, unspoken definition of a respectable Willow Creek resident. As she drew closer, the chaotic sounds of the party muffled, allowing Karen's words to crystallize in the air, each one a poisoned dart aimed directly at her nephews. "You boys," Karen was hissing, her voice a stage whisper designed to perform for the small audience of neighbors who were now pretending not to watch. "You were running and screaming like a pair of wild animals. This is a civilized neighborhood. People are trying to enjoy themselves, to have a pleasant conversation. Your behavior is completely and utterly unacceptable." Jamal, small for his age and possessing a heart that was perhaps too tender for the world, looked to be on the very verge of tears, his lower lip trembling as he stared at his worn sneakers. Tariq, ever the protector, stood a little straighter, his brow furrowed, not with guilt, but with the genuine confusion of a child who cannot comprehend the logic of an adult's anger. "We were just playing tag, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice a respectful but barely audible counterpoint to Karen's tirade. "We weren't being that loud. Everyone's loud." Karen let out a short, sharp scoff, a sound like tearing fabric. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, a gesture of unassailable authority. "Don't you dare talk back to me. Young man, I saw you with my own two eyes. And I heard you. You were disturbing the peace. This block party is for everyone, not just for you to run around like unsupervised hooligans." It was at that moment that Maya arrived, her presence a sudden, solid shield against Karen's verbal assault. She placed a firm, grounding hand on each of her nephew's shoulders, giving them a reassuring squeeze that she hoped conveyed the message, "I am here. You are safe. Is everything all right here?" "Karen," she asked, her voice a model of forced calm, though an unmistakable edge of steel lay just beneath the surface. Karen's eyes, cold and gray as a winter sky, narrowed. Her focus shifted from the boys to Maya, her expression hardening with undisguised displeasure at the interruption of her lecture. "Oh, Maya," she said, her tone dripping with a cloying, faux sweetness that was far more insulting than outright anger. "Just having a little chat with your nephews about appropriate public behavior. They were being rather disruptive." Maya's grip on her nephew's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. Disruptive how she pressed, her gaze unwavering, refusing to be dismissed. Karen huffed, a small, impatient sound. Running, shouting. It was quite disturbing to some of the residents who were trying to enjoy a quiet afternoon. Maya's eyes did a quick, subtle scan of the faces of the people nearby. Most were now studiously avoiding eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their paper plates of potato salad or the intricate patterns of the pavement. A few, however, offered Maya small, almost imperceptible nods of support, their eyes conveying a weary solidarity. They had all, at one time or another, been on the receiving end of Karen's unsolicited corrections. Then, Karen escalated, her face contorting with a sudden, theatrical display of performative outrage. "Honestly, Maya," she said, her voice rising again, drawing more unwilling eyes to their little drama. "These children need to learn respect. They need to understand that their actions have consequences in a community. In fact," she continued, her gaze fixating on Jamal and Tariq with an almost predatory intensity, "I believe a sincere and public apology is in order. Right now." Maya's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about noise anymore. There was something darker swirling in Karen's eyes, a glint of something deeply unpleasant, a desire not just for quiet, but for submission. "An apology," Maya repeated slowly, her voice dangerously soft. "For what?" "Exactly. For playing at a block party." Karen's lips thinned into a bloodless, unforgiving line. "For disturbing the peace. For showing a complete and utter lack of respect for their elders and their neighbors. I think," she said, pausing for a dramatic, calculated effect, her eyes gleaming with a strange, fervent light, "that they should get on their knees and ask for forgiveness." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Kneel. The word hung in the air, grotesque and obscene amidst the cheerful summer sounds. Maya stared at Karen, her mind reeling in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. This was not a request. It was a command, a demand for a ritual of public humiliation, a forced act of submissive deference that felt laden with the ugly weight of centuries of history. It was a power play of the most vile and explicit kind. "They will not," Maya said, her voice dropping to a low, resonant note of absolute finality, all trace of forced politeness incinerated in a sudden flash of protective fury. "Be kneeling. Not now. Not ever. Are we clear?" Karen. Karen's eyes flashed with pure, unadulterated anger at being so directly defied. "Then I will have no choice but to speak to their parents," she declared, her voice shrill with thwarted authority. "I will file a formal complaint with the HOA. This kind of behavior will simply not be tolerated in Willow Creek." Maya took a small step forward, her 5'7" frame suddenly feeling like a fortress. Her gaze was unwavering, her resolve absolute. "I am their legal guardian. Karen. So you are speaking to their parent, and I am telling you, with all the clarity I can muster, that this conversation is over." She took her nephew's small, trembling hands in her own. "Come on, boys," she said, her voice a gentle but firm anchor in the storm. "Let's go get some ice cream. My treat." As they walked away, Maya could feel Karen's furious, impotent gaze burning into their backs. The simple, innocent joy of the block party had been irrevocably tainted, curdled by an act of petty tyranny that felt anything but petty. It had been replaced by a cold, simmering anger and a deep, unsettling unease that coiled in Maya's gut. In that moment, Maya Evans, the loving aunt who cherished her nephews and delighted in their boisterous, chaotic energy, ceased to exist. In her place stood Maya Evans, the statewide civil rights educator for the state of Illinois, a woman who had dedicated her entire professional life to fighting against precisely this kind of insidious, power-abusing injustice. The demand to kneel had not just been an insult. It had been a call to arms. It had crossed a line etched in history, igniting a fire that Karen Hawthorne, in her breathtaking ignorance, had no idea how to extinguish. The quiet suburban afternoon had just become a battleground. And Maya Evans was a warrior. Life for Maya Evans was usually a carefully balanced equation, a delicate dance between her demanding professional dedication and her all-encompassing familial love. Her days were a whirlwind of travel across the state, a blur of conference rooms, university auditoriums, and community centers where she led workshops on implicit bias, gave presentations on fair housing laws, and worked with schools and police departments to promote equity and protect the civil rights of all citizens. It was a challenging, often exhausting, career, but it was a calling, one that had been inspired by her own experiences growing up as a black woman in a world that wasn't always fair or just. Her work was her contribution, her way of honoring the legacy of those who had fought before her. Her evenings and weekends, however, were sacred. They belonged entirely to Jamal and Tariq, her sister's sons, her vibrant, brilliant sister, lost to them all 3 years prior in a car accident that had also claimed her husband, had entrusted her boys to Maya. They were her most precious responsibility and her greatest joy. Their home, once a quiet sanctuary of solitary calm, was now filled with the boisterous, chaotic energy of young boys, the constant, good-natured negotiation over screen time, and the comforting aroma of Maya's increasingly successful attempts at recreating her sister's legendary lasagna. She saw her sister's spark in Tariq's thoughtful eyes and her infectious grin in Jamal's easy smile. They were her reason for everything. Willow Creek, the seemingly idyllic suburban community they called home, was on the surface everything Maya had hoped for when she'd moved them there: excellent schools, tree-lined, walkable streets, and a palpable sense of safety. The reality, however, was often filtered through the rigid, unforgiving lens of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, an organization ruled with the iron fist of its president, Karen Hawthorne. Karen, a woman with an impeccably manicured lawn and an unshakable belief in her own moral and aesthetic superiority, had a well-earned reputation for enforcing the community's often nitpicky rules with an almost religious zeal. Minor infractions, from slightly overgrown hedges to holiday decorations left up a day too long, were met with sternly worded, passive-aggressive notices and the threat of escalating fines. Maya had learned early on to navigate Karen's particular brand of suburban tyranny with caution, keeping her head down and trying to avoid any direct conflict. She knew Karen's reputation for holding grudges, and her primary focus was on creating a stable, loving, and drama-free environment for her nephews. The block party had felt like a welcome respite from the usual low-grade anxiety that came with living under Karen's watchful eye. It was a rare occasion where the community seemed to genuinely relax. the rigid rules momentarily forgotten in a shared celebration. But Karen, it seemed, was constitutionally incapable of letting any moment of unscripted joy go unpoliced. Her demand that Jamal and Tariq kneel had been a stark, brutal reminder that beneath the veneer of neighborly harmony, there were deep, ugly undercurrents of prejudice and a rigid social hierarchy enforced by Karen's self-appointed authority. Maya's professional instincts, usually reserved for analyzing policy briefs and deconstructing legal frameworks, had flared to life in that moment with a white-hot intensity. The demand to kneel was not just about noisy children. It was about power. It was about the public assertion of dominance. It was about the ritualistic humiliation of two young black boys in front of their entire community. It was a microaggression with macro implications, a horrifyingly vivid illustration of the very systemic biases Maya fought against every single day. Later that evening, long after Jamal and Tariq were finally asleep, their earlier excitement replaced by a quiet, troubled unease, Maya sat at her kitchen table, staring at the half-eaten plate of macaroni and cheese from the party. The anger that had been simmering beneath a carefully controlled surface all afternoon now began to boil. She replayed the scene in her mind, every excruciating detail. She saw the fear in her nephew's eyes, the bewildered confusion on Tariq's face as he tried to understand his crime, the telltale tremor in Jamal's lower lip. She heard the casual cruelty in Karen's command, the utter lack of empathy, the naked assumption of her own superiority and her right to exact public penance. This was not an isolated incident of a grumpy neighbor complaining about noisy kids. This felt deliberate, targeted, and deeply rooted in something far more sinister than a simple desire for peace and quiet. Maya picked up her phone, her fingers moving with a new, grim purpose. She didn't call the local police. An institution she knew from professional experience often failed to adequately address, or even recognize, issues of racial bias and intimidation. Instead, she called her colleague and friend, David Chen, a senior investigator at the State Civil Rights Commission. David was meticulous, doggedly thorough, and shared Maya's unwavering commitment to justice. "David," she said, her voice low and steady, stripped of all emotion, but carrying an unmistakable weight of purpose. "I need to open a case. It involves an incident at a community event here in Willow Creek today. Public humiliation, intimidation, racial coercion. It's a mess." She then recounted the entire interaction with Karen Hawthorne, her voice remaining tight with controlled fury as she described the demand for her nephews to kneel and apologize. There was a long, charged silence on the other end of the line. Then, David's voice, usually so calm and measured, came back with a note of cold. "Hard steel. That's egregious. Maya, that is absolutely, unequivocally egregious. We need to act on this immediately. We will." Over the next few days, Maya and David began to meticulously build their case. Maya wrote a detailed, time-stamped account of the incident, recalling Karen's exact words, the tone of her voice, the expressions on her nephews' faces, and the reactions, or lack thereof, of the bystanders. David, meanwhile, began a deep dive into the public records of Karen Hawthorne and the Willow Creek HOA. He unearthed a pattern of behavior, a consistent stream of informal complaints and online grumblings from residents who felt unfairly targeted by Karen's strict enforcement of rules, often along thinly veiled lines of race, family status, or perceived social standing. There were stories of petty power abuses, of selective enforcement, of a community living in a state of low-level fear of Karen's judgment. The inciting incident had been Karen's public demand, but the rising action, Karen's retaliation, was swift and relentless. First came the official letter from the Willow Creek HOA, delivered via certified mail, and, for maximum public effect, also taped to Maya's front door. It accused Jamal and Tariq of unruly and disruptive behavior, creating a public nuisance, and a flagrant failure to adhere to community standards of conduct. It levied a hefty $200 fine and threatened further action, including the suspension of the family's access to all community amenities, including the pool and playground. The language was cold, legalistic, and clearly designed to intimidate and silence any potential challenge to Karen's authority. Then came the more insidious acts of harassment. Maya noticed that she and her nephews were suddenly being subjected to a new level of hyper-scrutiny within the community. When she walked the boys to the school bus stop, Karen would be out, ostensibly weeding her petunias, but pointedly staring at them, her lips pursed in a permanent state of disapproval. Maya overheard snippets of conversations among neighbors at the grocery store, hushed whispers that seemed to follow them like a shadow. One afternoon, Maya found a bag of trash, not her own, deliberately dumped on her front porch. Another time, she discovered that her car tires had been mysteriously deflated overnight. While none of these incidents could be directly and legally linked to Karen, they created a hostile, suffocating climate of intimidation and made Maya feel increasingly isolated and targeted. Her nephews, already shaken by the block party incident, became withdrawn and anxious, constantly looking over their shoulders. The carefree joy that had once filled their home was being steadily, systematically eroded by a pervasive sense of unease and unwelcome. The most egregious act, the one that crossed the line from harassment to outright cruelty, occurred a week after the block party. Tariq, a talented and passionate athlete, had earned a coveted spot on the local youth soccer team, a source of immense pride and excitement for him. The first practice of the season was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the community soccer field. When Maya took him to the field, his new cleats slung over his shoulder and a look of pure joy on his face, they were met by Karen. She stood blocking the entrance to the field, her arms crossed, her face set in a hard, determined line. "I'm afraid your nephew won't be able to participate today," she said, her voice cold and devoid of any warmth or compromise. Maya stared at her in stunned disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "Karen, he made the team. His coach is expecting him." Karen's smile was tight, unpleasant, and triumphant. As per Section 14, subsection C of the HOA regulations, any resident who has outstanding fines or has been found in formal violation of community conduct standards is temporarily suspended from the use of all community facilities and amenities. Your nephew's egregious behavior at the block party constituted a clear violation, until the $200 fine is paid in full and a formal written apology is issued to the board, a sincere one. Mind you, Tariq will not be permitted on this field. Tariq's face crumpled. The pure, unadulterated joy he had felt just moments before vanished, replaced by a wave of crushing disappointment and a fresh, burning sting of public humiliation. Maya's anger, which she had so carefully kept simmering on a low heat, finally reached a rolling, furious boil. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. This was a deliberate and malicious act of punishing her nephews, of stripping Tariq of a hard-earned privilege, of wielding the power of the HOA as a weapon of retribution against two innocent children. This was cruelty for cruelty's sake, and Maya knew, with every fiber of her being, that she had to fight back with everything she had. The midpoint twist in the unfolding drama arrived not as a sudden, shocking revelation, but as the slow, chilling unraveling of a carefully constructed and long-maintained facade. As David Chen, with his characteristic tenacity, delved deeper into Karen Hawthorne's background. He uncovered a series of inconsistencies, omissions, and carefully buried discrepancies that painted a far more complex and disturbing picture than that of a merely overzealous, power-hungry HOA president. He discovered that Karen had a long and storied history of involvement in local politics and community organizations, often leveraging her positions to exert control and influence in ways that consistently benefited her and her close circle of allies. But the truly significant discovery, the one that changed the entire complexion of the case, was an incident from Karen's past, unearthed from the dusty archives of the State Education Board. It was a previously sealed record of a formal civil rights complaint filed against her more than 2 decades earlier, during her tenure as a history teacher at a local elementary school. Due to the sealed nature of the record, the specific details were sparse. But the nature of the complaint, serious allegations of racial bias, discriminatory grading practices, and the creation of a hostile educational environment for students of color, sent a shiver down Maya's spine. It suggested, with terrifying clarity, that Karen's behavior at the block party was not an isolated incident, not a momentary lapse in judgment, but part of a long, established, and deeply ingrained pattern of behavior. It implied a deep-seated prejudice that went far beyond a simple, if misguided, desire for order and quiet. This wasn't just about power. It was about a deeply ingrained belief in her own racial and social superiority, and a chilling willingness to use her authority to demean, control, and punish those she perceived as beneath her. The sealed record hinted at a darkness lurking just beneath Karen's polished, respectable exterior, a secret she had worked very hard, and for a very long time, to keep buried. This stunning revelation shifted Maya's focus, broadening her perspective. This was no longer just about seeking justice for the humiliation of Jamal and Tariq. It was about exposing a dangerous and recurring pattern of discriminatory behavior. It was about ensuring that Karen Hawthorne could no longer wield her power, in any capacity, to harm others. The deeply personal had become inextricably and powerfully linked to the systemic. The fight was no longer just for her family. It was for every child, every family that had ever been, or might ever be, in the crosshairs of Karen Hawthorne's prejudice. The climax of the conflict unfolded at a tense and volatile emergency meeting of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, called by Karen with an almost frantic urgency. The official agenda, circulated via email, was to discuss the ongoing and escalating issues of disruptive behavior within the community and the pressing need to reinforce community standards of conduct. But the real, unspoken purpose of the meeting was clear to everyone. It was Karen's attempt to consolidate her power, to publicly vindicate her actions, and to officially sanction Maya and her family. The atmosphere in the packed community center hall was thick with anticipation and a palpable undercurrent of rebellion. News of the civil rights complaint, filed by Maya, had spread through the community like wildfire, fueled by concerned whispers in grocery store aisles and a flurry of posts on the neighborhood's anonymous online forum. Many residents, who had long felt silenced, intimidated, and bullied by Karen's heavy-handed and often arbitrary rule, saw this meeting as their first, and perhaps last, opportunity to finally voice their long-suppressed concerns. Karen, either oblivious to or in denial of the seismic shift in public sentiment, stood at the head of the room, radiating an air of injured righteousness. She launched into a lengthy, rambling, and impassioned speech, painting herself as the victim of a malicious and unwarranted personal attack. She portrayed Maya's nephews as unruly, disrespectful troublemakers who threatened the very fabric of their peaceful community. She reiterated the HOA's unwavering commitment to maintaining high standards and called for an immediate vote to formally censure Maya and restrict her nephew's access to all community facilities until her demands for a fine and apology were met. She spoke with an almost manic energy, her voice rising and falling with a theatrical indignation that was beginning to wear thin on the increasingly skeptical audience. As Karen raised her gavel to call for the vote, a clear, calm voice cut through the tense silence. "Madam President." Every head in the room turned. Maya Evans was on her feet, her posture poised, her expression resolute. Her presence, usually so unassuming, now commanded the absolute attention of the room. A hush fell as she walked slowly and deliberately to the front, her gaze steady and unwavering as she faced Karen. "Before you proceed with this vote," Maya said, her voice calm, but carrying with a quiet, undeniable strength that seemed to suck all the air out of Karen's blustering sails, "I believe there are a few things the members of this association need to be fully aware of." Karen's face tightened, a flicker of genuine apprehension finally crossing her features. "This is not the time or the place for further disruption. Maya," she snapped, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "We are trying to conduct official association business here." Maya's gaze didn't waver. "This is official business, Karen. It concerns the integrity of this association, the ethical conduct of its president, and the fundamental well-being of this entire community." She then proceeded to calmly and methodically lay out the details of the formal civil rights complaint she had filed with the state, describing, in clear, unemotional terms, Karen's demand for her two young nephews to get on their knees and apologize for the crime of playing tag. A collective, audible gasp went through the room. But Maya wasn't finished. With the chilling precision of a prosecutor delivering her closing argument, she then revealed the information David had uncovered about the decades-old, sealed civil rights complaint filed against Karen from her time as a teacher, detailing the disturbing allegations of racial bias and discriminatory treatment of minority students. The room erupted in a cacophony of shocked whispers and angry, incredulous murmurs. Faces that had previously been neutral, or even passively supportive of Karen, now registered a mixture of disbelief, dawning comprehension, and outright outrage. Sensing her control slipping away with terrifying speed, Karen tried desperately to regain the narrative. "These are old, unsubstantiated, and sealed allegations," she declared, her voice now shrill with a rising panic. "This is nothing but a malicious personal vendetta designed to smear my good name." But her words rang hollow, her denials drowned out by a rising tide of dissent. One by one, residents who had been cowed into silence for years began to find their voices. An elderly woman stood up, her voice trembling with years of suppressed frustration, and recounted being fined hundreds of dollars for the non-conforming color of her garden gnome. A young Latino family spoke of being repeatedly harassed about the smell of their cooking. Another resident described Karen's attempts to have their disabled mother's ramp removed because it violated the aesthetic harmony of the street. The stories poured out, a torrent of grievances that painted a devastating portrait of a leader who ruled not through consensus, but through fear, intimidation, and prejudice. The dam of silence had finally, spectacularly, broken. The climax reached its inevitable peak when a motion was made from the floor by one of the residents for an immediate vote of no confidence in Karen Hawthorne as president of the Homeowners Association. The vote was swift, decisive, and brutal in its unanimity. By an overwhelming, near-unanimous majority, the members of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association voted to remove Karen Hawthorne from her position of power. The gavel, which had for so long been her symbol of absolute authority, fell silent as her long and tyrannical reign came to an abrupt, public, and ignominious end. The aftermath of Karen Hawthorne's dramatic ouster was as swift as it was transformative. Stripped of her position and facing the very real and public prospect of a formal, full-scale investigation by the State Civil Rights Commission, her carefully constructed facade of community leadership and moral authority crumbled into dust. The Willow Creek HOA Board, now liberated from her iron-fisted grip, moved quickly to undo the damage. In their first meeting, they voted unanimously to immediately rescind the fine levied against Maya and to issue a formal, public letter of apology for the discriminatory treatment of Jamal and Tariq. To a round of applause from the residents in attendance, Tariq was officially and enthusiastically reinstated on the community soccer team, with the board voting to cover his registration fees for the season as a gesture of goodwill. The investigation by the Civil Rights Commission proceeded with a quiet, relentless efficiency, faced with a compelling and meticulously documented case built on Maya's powerful testimony, David's thorough research, and the now corroborating accounts of numerous other Willow Creek residents. Karen's legal options dwindled to nothing. The once sealed record from her past as a teacher was formally unsealed by a judge, revealing a clear and disturbing pattern of racially biased behavior that directly mirrored her actions at the block party. Rather than face a lengthy, costly, and deeply humiliating public hearing that would further tarnish her already shattered reputation, Karen, through her lawyers, agreed to a comprehensive settlement. As part of the binding agreement, she was required to issue a formal, written public apology for her actions, to attend and complete an extensive anti-discrimination and sensitivity training program at her own expense, and, most significantly, to step down permanently from any current or future leadership positions within any Willow Creek community organization. While Maya had initially considered pursuing further legal action for monetary damages, she ultimately decided that the public accountability, the forced education, and the systemic changes within her community were the most meaningful and lasting forms of justice. In the weeks and months that followed, a palpable change swept through Willow Creek. The community began to heal. The newly elected HOA Board, comprised of a diverse and thoughtful group of residents committed to fairness and inclusivity, embarked on a comprehensive revision of the community bylaws, systematically eliminating the petty, arbitrary, and often discriminatory regulations that had been Karen's primary tools of control. They organized a series of community dialogues and potluck dinners focused on diversity, inclusion, and what it truly meant to be a good neighbor, fostering a new and genuine sense of understanding and empathy among residents who had previously only been united by a shared zip code. The annual block party was held again the following year, and the atmosphere was transformed. It was a truly joyful, relaxed, and vibrant celebration of community spirit, finally free from the oppressive shadow of Karen Hawthorne's judgment. Jamal and Tariq, no longer looking over their shoulders, ran and laughed with their friends, their uninhibited joy a powerful symbol of the community's renewed sense of freedom. Maya watched them from a picnic blanket on the grass, a quiet, profound sense of satisfaction settling over her. Justice hadn't just been served in a legal document. It had been woven into the very fabric of her community. She had used her professional expertise and her personal resolve not just to protect her family, but to dismantle a local system of prejudice and to help create a more equitable and welcoming environment for everyone. The low-grade fear and intimidation that had once gripped Willow Creek had been replaced by a sense of hope, engagement, and a genuine commitment to building a community where every resident, regardless of their background, felt safe, respected, and valued. The ending wasn't about Karen's punishment. It was about the collective healing and the bright promise of a better future for Willow Creek. A future where no child would ever be forced to kneel for the crime of simply being themselves. The echo of her nephew's joyful laughter, the feeling of the warm summer sun on her face, the easy, friendly conversation she was having with her neighbors. These were the powerful, lasting, and deeply satisfying reminders of the hard-won victory and the enduring, resilient strength of a community that had finally found its heart.